Today, a California federal jury convicted a retired FBI agent of bribery for taking money and a high-priced motorcycle in exchange for running searches on law enforcement databases. Now, if I wanted to mischaracterize this or overstate it, I would make this seem like it's representative of the FBI as a whole, that they're all corrupt. The same way the BLM protesters made the actions of some bad cops representative of all officers and departments. But neither's the reality. For the past couple of years, I've been disappointed, even disillusioned, by those who shared my anger in 2020 at how the police were being treated, with calls to defund. But those same people now want to effectively defund the FBI. The latest effort to discredit the FBI has been the case of Mark Houck, the Pennsylvania pro-life activist who is charged with twice assaulting an escort who brings people in and out of abortion clinics. It started when Houck's wife told a Catholic news outlet, quote, "A SWAT team of about 25 came to my house with about 15 vehicles and started pounding on our door. They were going to break it in if he didn't open it, and then they had about 5 guns pointed at my husband, myself, and basically at my kids." She didn't present any evidence to back it up, but of course the right-wing media lost their minds, getting another opportunity to attack the FBI and its supposed political bias.
FBI agents pointed rifles at Houck and his wife in front of their 7 children. Once again, to be clear, Houck is not a terrorist. He's never been accused of terrorism. He is instead a pro-lifer. They wanted to punish him and terrify his family to send the right message to anyone who would dare get in the way of the Biden agenda.
Now, except we don't know that that actually happened. The FBI disputed that, their Philadelphia office putting out a statement that said in part, quote, "No SWAT team or SWAT operators were involved. FBI agents knocked on Mr. Houck's front door, identified themselves as FBI agents, asked him to exit the residence. He did so and was taken into custody without incident pursuant to an indictment." This is just part of a broader attack on the FBI from some on the right. National Review senior writer Charles Cook recently wrote an article titled "The Case for Dismantling the FBI." The subhead of the article, "The Bureau is a violent, expansionist, self-aggrandizing, and careless outfit that sits awkwardly within the American constitutional order." Now, just substitute the words police for FBI, and it could be a headline written by a BLM activist about abolishing the police. He even cites the Matt Gaetz case as an example of the overreach, except the Gaetz case is actually an example of the Department of Justice and federal prosecutors working exactly as they should. The investigation, which was launched by Bill Barr's Justice Department, came because a guy named Joel Greenberg was indicted and pled guilty to sex trafficking of a child, and he sure seemed to implicate Gaetz. It didn't come out of thin air. Greenberg's attorney at the time said, quote, "Based on what my client knows, I'm sure Matt Gaetz is not feeling very comfortable today." But the system worked. They investigated, and it appears Gaetz will not get charged. The article goes on to make a tired argument that many who now want to impugn the FBI have been making. Quote, "What the FBI did to Matt Gaetz is precisely what it did to Donald Trump. And what it did to Donald Trump is what it's been doing since it was founded, namely spying on or attempting to discredit anyone who irritates the powers that be." Except we know exactly why the Trump investigation was open. Both an FBI Inspector General investigation, a bipartisan Senate investigation have determined the investigation was open legitimately. Yes, the FBI made mistakes. But there's no evidence it was political. Some love to cite Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's texts claiming that a partisan FBI was out to get Donald Trump in 2016 to prevent him from winning. But here's what none of them seem to be able to explain. If the FBI wanted to do that, to prevent Donald Trump from winning, it would have been really easy for any of the agents or supervisors working on the case to just leak that Trump was being investigated for possible ties to the Russians. That literally could have changed the outcome of the election. But they didn't. Instead, James Comey came out 11 days before the election and announced that Hillary Clinton was being investigated again. Look, I'm not trying to claim that he was trying to help her either, or hurt her. The sometimes troubled history of the FBI has become another talking point to attack today's FBI. As Cook wrote, quote, "This, you may recall, is the same agency that tried to persuade Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself. It's the same agency that compiled the list of 12,000 Americans and upon the outbreak of the Korean War urged President Truman to jail them without trial." Okay, maybe true. Except anyone can find a greatest hits of the worst of law enforcement, especially many police departments in the South in the 1950s and 60s. My argument in defending law enforcement is about the now, today. The past doesn't represent officers who each day put their lives on the line to keep us safe. Same applies to the FBI. And yet this article continues. It says, bit by bit, year by year, case by case, the FBI has turned itself into a sort of unmoored super police force, which, despite being nominally accountable to the executive branch, is independent from political control. Yeah, except theoretically, that's how almost all law enforcement is supposed to work. Untethered to politicians, independent. It's just insane, the level of attacks on the FBI, just nonstop. So my question is, can the FBI regain its status, even among those who are critical? Or are too many too invested in this sort of the FBI or evil narrative? Joining me now is John Pistole, the former United States Deputy Director of the FBI. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. So
Glad to be with you.
Do you think there's anything that the agency can do now to address this growing concern in the country?
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities that the FBI under Director Chris Wray has and has actually been doing. Whether people are noticing or not is a different issue. But one thing that Director Wray focuses on is letting the actions of the FBI speak for themselves, as opposed to trying cases, if you will, in the public realm. So as opposed to putting out press statements and saying, here's all the dirt we have on this person because in this search we found X, Y, and Z, they obviously follow the rule of law and the judicial process for what the rule should be, and that is to try a person in a court of law with a presumption of innocence. Now, if there's probable cause to believe, for example, that there's evidence of a crime that's been committed on the first hand, and in the second hand, there's evidence that there's probable cause that there is whatever, maybe documents, for example, at a specific location, then the FBI goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office for that area, and if they agree, they then go to a federal district court judge and seek and get a search warrant.
Does it frustrate you to hear all these attacks on an organization that you worked at for so long?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spent almost 27 years there, and the last almost 6 of which is as a deputy director, the number 2 position, and in both Republican and Democrat administrations. And there was no political influence. And so people who are alleging that obviously don't have the firsthand knowledge, so that would be hearsay in a court of law. And so they're basing their claims, their allegations on what I would say is unfounded information that I, in my time, did not see at all. And again, I briefed a number of times at the White House and testified on the Hill and things, and I did not see that during my tenure.
You know, one of the things I do think that the FBI could do better is to stop some of the leaks, right? I mean, you make the point about speaking through indictments, right? And, you know, for example, in the Trump investigation and others, there have been leaks. I made the point that in the 2016 election, they could have sunk Trump's campaign by leaking that Trump was being investigated with Russia, and that didn't happen. But it does seem that there has been a leaking issue. Do you think that that's fair?
Well, I think in any organization of 37,000 plus people who deal with very sensitive information every day, and then some not so sensitive information, more generic information, there are some people who may want to do that and have in the past. But that is a great or rare exception, I would say, from the day-to-day activities of the professionalism, the integrity of, and the hardworking men and women who go about protecting Americans' lives every day from all sorts of threats, both foreign and domestic.
Absolutely.
So no, I think people who are making those statements simply either have a political agenda or a personal agenda, or they are uninformed of what the FBI does on a day-to-day basis through that professionalism.
John Pistole, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your service to this country. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.